Good evening, I'm DK Rostow. Welcome back to the TTT News. We're joined this evening by CEO of Conflict Women, Asiya Mohammed, who is telling us of some of the work that her organization is doing to help women in unhealthy situations. Thank you so much for joining us, Asiya.
Thank you for having me this afternoon. Very nice to be here.
Our pleasure. We have a few things to talk about, but we'll start off with gender-based violence. What is your take on gender-based violence, or from your organization's standpoint? And I think you also have some figures that you can share with us, please, and thanks.
Definitely. So gender-based violence right now is being described by the United Nations as a shadow pandemic, particularly during the COVID times. We are seeing that because of lockdown measures, there has been an increase in reporting, not just in Trinidad and Tobago, but globally. We have seen this reported here by the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, specifically the Gender-Based Violence Unit, and we're seeing a spike in gender-based violence across the board. Now, prior to COVID, we know that the Women's Health Survey showed that 1 out of every 3 women will experience violence in their lifetime, and that survey was conducted right here in Trinidad and Tobago, and those were the results that we have.
Now, when you say shadow pandemic, that makes me feel that you don't necessarily see the entire picture. Am I on track here, or how do I treat with that terminology?
Exactly, you're right, because a lot of women and girls and victims suffer in silence, and we know that their voice cannot be heard, and we know that oftentimes they have been silenced. What we've seen from the Women's Health Survey, which was conducted in Trinidad and Tobago in 2017 by the Inter-American Development Bank in collaboration with UN Women, is that a very small percentage of women who are being abused actually report. Most go to family and friends, especially to their mothers, instead of to the police. So this is hence the word shadow pandemic.
But it's interesting, though, because it seems as though there have been an increase in reports that have been made. There has been conversation that the fact that there's now a gender-based violence unit would be one of the things that would help people say, okay, well, I feel a little more confident reporting this as opposed to going to a normal police station. How do we treat with that? Do we take a grain of salt? Do we take a bottle? Do we say if these are the amount of people that are reporting that there should be so many more who have not? How do we look at those statistics and figures?
Yeah, I mean, I think the gender-based violence units and the police service in particular, they've done a really good job in trying to make reporting accessible to everyone. They've used, through the gender-based violence unit, the slogan, if you see something, say something. And now anyone in the country can download the TTPS app on your phone. So you no longer have to be a bystander. If you witness domestic violence happening, even as a third party, you're allowed to report it. Once the information goes to the police service, then it will be investigated. I think too often what happens is we see what is happening when a woman is murdered. Every time we see another femicide, we hear villagers, we hear community members, we hear family members saying, I knew that was happening. But it's no longer good enough to say, I know that was happening and not get involved. Even if you want to report something anonymously, please report it, because you could help to save a life.
Because hindsight does nothing for the victim. So, but at the same time, answer the person who says, but I reported more than once, and she went right back there. Or if it was a problem, why she didn't leave? What are some of the factors that make it so hard to remove yourself from that situation, Asiya?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many challenges for a woman who's trying to leave. One of them is finances, one of them is children, there's fear, there's danger, there's social stigma. Many people, even sometimes we hear religious leaders, women go to them in confidence to say, I'm being beaten or I'm being abused. And you would hear religious leaders say, well, go back and stay, try again, get marriage counseling. I think what we need to know is that domestic violence is a crime. It is illegal. It is punishable by the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. So we need to shift our mindsets here. We need to stop saying this is family business, and we need to get involved to ensure that our women, our children are protected from gender-based violence.
And what are some of the definitions or the factors that go into the definition of gender-based violence? Because one thing I can see potentially is somebody doing like the meme for One Punch Man and balling me, abuse. I never do that. I never put a hand on her. But the things that you say may be disparaging, and so much so that the person may begin to buy into that narrative and continue it. When we say violence, what kind of aspects are we covering?
Right. So when we use the term gender-based violence, we cover so many different things. We cover domestic violence, we cover rape, we cover sexual harassment, any sort of violence that happens because of one's gender can be termed as gender-based violence. So it's a broad stroke. It could even be discrimination against or violence, against the LGBTQ community. So violence against women, domestic violence, sexual harassment, all of these things fall under the ambit when we see gender-based violence. And I think you raise a really important point, and it's crucial that people, that men and boys, that women and girls educate themselves so they understand what gender-based violence is. I think what studies have revealed to us is many perpetrators of domestic violence or sexual violence may not define what they're doing as violence. And I think that is where the conversation has to start. How do we define this? And am I actually perpetrating violence, or am I experiencing violence?
Now, see, you introduced a term to the conversation, femicide. What does that term mean?
Right. So a femicide is the murder of a female, a woman or girl based on gender. And we've seen this across this entire year of 2020. We had up till recently the murder of Ashanti Riley, 18 years old. And that brings the femicide count in Trinidad and Tobago for 2020 to 21 women and girls who have been murdered specifically based to gender-based violence in 2020 in Trinidad and Tobago. And that's quite an alarming statistic. I think it's something that we should all be concerned about. And I saw the public outrage all across social media, specifically, when it came to the recent murder of Ashanti Riley, who boarded a taxi and then was found murdered.
No, and I think on that somber note, we take a short break. When we return, we continue the conversation with Asiya Mohammed of Conflict Women. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are speaking with Asiya Mohammed of Conflict Women. We just spoke about gender-based violence. We introduced the term femicide. And I want to get a little more information about the organization itself, please, Asiya. What is Conflict Women? What is the goal? How was it started? What's the inspiration behind starting it?
Thanks so much for that question. So we were founded in 2014. Basically, we're solving gender-based violence through entrepreneurship. So since 2014, we've been doing trainings and workshops for survivors of rape, survivors of domestic violence. We recently launched, in conjunction with the British government, our Survivor Pitch program, where we are training survivors in business development. We're actually matching them with business mentors, and we're investing seed capital for them to launch brand new business ideas or to expand existing businesses. So this is work that we've been doing across the years, because I think everyone needs to find out, what can I do? How can I move from just identifying a problem to really becoming a part of the solution? And so one of the challenges that we discussed previously in terms of a woman leaving is, does she have that financial independence to leave? So through entrepreneurship, we're trying to make sure women can become financially independent and they can leave. Some of the story as to why I started this organization is because my parents were in a domestic violence relationship. So from the time I was a young child, I witnessed violence abuse, emotional, psychological, physical, between my parents. And I spent a large portion of my life, doing counseling, getting the necessary help, the necessary treatment, before I can actually launch out and become an activist in this area. So children of domestic violence are considered secondary victims because we experience a lot of the violence at homes. And so for me, this is also quite personal, and it's one of my life's passions.
Well, you're talking to me right now, and my paws are raising because my question to you would have been, okay, well, this is a lot of heavy lifting in terms of the organization and the work that you're doing. But where does that come from? Because I don't think it would be, you just, you know what would be cool? So it has to come from somewhere. So thank you for sharing that with us and also raising the issue of the fact that gender-based violence doesn't necessarily affect two people. There are other people involved, and many times you have a lot of people toting baggage for stuff that they never had anything to do with necessarily on that kind of initial or that first phase. So do you just include the people who are suffering from it as in terms like the first people? So like you speak about females or people suffering from gender-based violence. Is there any way that you all are able to support or facilitate help for the children who are the secondary people affected by this?
That's a great question. Thank you so much. So actually, we do the conflict women workshops and trainings. And last year for Christmas, we were able to, typically we only offer our workshops and trainings to survivors themselves, but we had done a poll, a survey, sort of like post-workshop poll. And our survivors, the majority of them said they would love to have an event where they could welcome their children to the event. So last year, Christmas, we did a big Christmas gala for the survivors. We brought in inspirational speakers, women who had been through domestic violence themselves. They were able to speak to the ladies, they were able to share their experiences and really encourage them. But more importantly, we were able to welcome their children. And for the children, it was such a fantastic experience that the children all said to us, we want to come to every conflict women workshop after that one. So, I mean, typically the workshops are targeted towards survivors themselves, but when we have occasions like, during Christmas time, etc., and we can welcome the children, we do that. And I think one thing that's really important to note for this conversation is that, many girls who witness gender-based violence as children, if they witness it between their parents, they often choose partners who are violent themselves because that is what they know. On the other hand, boys who witness their fathers beating their mothers, they start to normalize the violence. And so when they start dating or when they get into intimate partner relationships, they oftentimes become perpetrators. And this is something we need to do a lot more research into, because we need to find out really what is that correlation. So a lot of perpetrators, if you ask them, did you have a father? Did you have a male role model? They would say no. Many of the times they come from broken families and they would have witnessed their fathers abusing their mothers or their, siblings or themselves. And that is what they see, and that is what, when they grow up, they end up doing, perpetrating violence themselves.
So I've heard there's a saying that hurt people hurt people. And I want to get to how do we move from just experiencing that hurt and articulating that hurt in a physical manifestation towards something positive. But before that, though, I appreciate the fact that many of the things that you've said, they're stemming from evidence or research that has been done. You just spoke about research that needs to be done. What are some of the ways that you do this to drive your evidence-based research forward in terms of the work that you do?
Yeah, thanks so much. So the thing is, I'm an activist. So sometimes I say things that, people, different parties can perceive of as controversial. And so for us as activists, every single thing we say needs to be backed by research. So you would hear a lot of times, you would hear me reference the Women's Health Survey, which was conducted in 2017 in Trinidad and Tobago. And it's now published and it's in the public domain. And there were two components to that. the quantitative part of the research as well as the qualitative part of the research. And so what I would do is encourage everyone to look at the Women's Health Survey, because prior to that, for activists, we had no real time, or very little, I should say, information as to what are the statistics. So it was quite difficult for us to speak to what was happening in Trinidad and Tobago. We had global statistics, but we needed local statistics. For us within Conflict Women, we do a lot of data internally. So we're always surveying our survivors. We want to find out what their feedback is. We do application forms with them when they first come in, so we can find out, for example, did they experience abuse as a child? This is something that we've seen. There's a correlation between those who experience abuse, who've been victims of abuse as children, and also they move forward. Many times they end up choosing domestic violence, or getting into, I shouldn't say choosing, but getting into domestic violence relationships themselves. So having the data is critical, because then we can have data-driven policies that are backed by data.
What's the catchment area of the individuals that you provide services for? How do people contact you? And I'm wondering about the matching those entrepreneurship skills to individuals. Do you have to go out and say, okay, well, we want people to learn how to do this? Or do you ask them what they are interested in? And so it's three questions, but I'm asking them in that order. Thanks.
Thanks so much. So people can contact us via social media is the best way to contact us. We have the Conflict Women page on Facebook. You can also contact us on Instagram, on our Conflict Women page, or on LinkedIn, also at the Conflict Women page. In terms of our survivors, we actually just help to enhance and to make a reality whatever their idea is. So we started off by training them to do jewelry. So these earrings I'm wearing today are actually made by one of our amazing survivors. So a lot of people who know the company would have purchased or bought some of our jewelry. And since that time, what we realized is that, some wanted to do jewelry, but others had their own ideas. So people wanted to design clothing, they wanted to do cleaning or maintenance businesses, they wanted to do graphic design businesses, they wanted to sell pepper sauce and make soaps and make candles. And so we sort of shifted and pivoted the Conflict Women idea to really supporting whatever their idea was. So whether it is they're doing a catering business and selling food, to making soaps and candles, to doing jewelry, we support them. And the way we support them is through mentorship, through business training. We're so fortunate to have had some of the most amazing business facilitators come in from all around the world during COVID, give up their time to participate and do virtual workshops with our survivors. And then, of course, for the amazing support from the British government to help us with seed capital, so they not just have those fantastic business ideas, but that they can invest money into their businesses and make them a reality.
And that brings us with the last minute to how do we create change? Because it's one thing to have a sense of outrage and then we start to have conversations, but in terms of calls to actions and having you actually say, okay, well, these are some of the things that we want you to do. Because we've seen a lot of gentlemen speaking to ladies at this point in time, but you have the opportunity. Your last words, 30 seconds.
Thanks so much. So I would say to everyone looking at this program, take one action. Sit, reflect, maybe journal, figure out what is my one action? What am I going to do as an individual? What am I going to do as head of government? What am I going to do as CEO of a company to make sure that domestic violence is eradicated within my organization? That's how we create change. Thank you.
And thank you for the work that you're doing, as well as Asiya Mohammed, CEO of Conflict Women, joining us here this evening. And on behalf of Verna and the entire news team, I'm DK Rossa. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a good night.